Hello, Aleen Wilson here. This is from my husband John's letter to our children called Dear David and Mary, written in 1999. This is called What We Wore and How We Played. Until about age 2, we wore rompers. They were one piece and snapped at the bottom under the crotch. They were blousy, of a vapid color, and usually had puffed sleeves. I hated them because they were so confining. But mamas liked them because they had snaps at the bottom, which made changing diapers easy. Somewhere along the line, we graduated to overalls. Only we called them overhauls. They had a bib in front and originally were designed to wear over the clothes, but we didn't know that. We wore these until our teenage years, to school, everywhere. When they became threadbare on the knees, mamas put in patches. They were of denim cloth and lasted forever, especially the patches. In the summertime, mamas would cut them below the knees because they couldn't be patched anymore, and expected their boys to wear them. I never knew any boy who wore these cut-off overalls willingly. When you cut them, they were short pants, and nobody in his right mind would wear short pants, except those guys from linemen. They'd wear anything. Somewhere along the line, I got my first pair of knicker pants. The bottoms were supposed to fit snug on the legs below the knees. Mine never did. The elastic would weaken and the knickers would drop to mid-length. Crisis. The knickers were usually corduroy. Each time you walked and one leg rubbed against the other, they made a whistling sound. That's why they were called whistle breeches. I finally got used to this, but I never liked it. Knickers were for sissies. About the time we entered the 8th grade, every boy who was anybody began to think about cars. The faster, the better. And the more streamlined, the better. In 1939, I fantasized about having an unknown rich uncle who suddenly appeared and granted my wildest wish, a Nash convertible. The teacher would drone on about it was that it was all I could think of. I guess I finally got Nash convertibles out of my mind when World War II began, and I realized that I would probably be inducted into the armed forces. That put a damper on Nash convertibles. Years later, in Elkin, North Carolina, I bought my first car, a long black 4-door Pontiac. It looked like a getaway car for a bank robbery, but I loved it because it was my first car. I traded it for my first new car, a 1955 Pontiac sedan that was gray outside and red inside. It was probably the most beautiful car in the world. The years change your perspective. Now I drive an oldish Honda that has 145,000 miles on it, needs a paint job and new hoses throughout. It looks as though it might expire any minute, and I love it. I remember the cars we had as a family. I have already mentioned the Buick touring car with side curtains. The last car I remember was a Ford A model in Tuckapaw. It looked like a black box, not like the egg-shaped space-age vehicles we drive today. Okay, games. We provided our own entertainment. Take cog-wheel wagons, for instance. For wheels, we used gears scavenged from the mill trash pile. The older boys would prepare a wagon bed of irregularly sawed planks, drive nails, and bend them around axles made of steel rods, then attach a rope for guidance. Presto, we had a cog-wheel wagon. These were great for roaring down Churchill. It felt like 90 miles an hour, but 2 miles an hour was more like it. For the most part, our games required no equipment, like crack the whip or drop the handkerchief. To make a whip, we would line up alongside each other, about 8 or 10 of us, grasp hands, and run like hell. Then the person at the beginning of the line would suddenly stop, and the rest of the line would crack like a whip. It's a wonder nobody got hurt. As for the handkerchief game, we'd gather around in a circle, and somebody would circle around and drop the handkerchief at an unsuspecting person in the circle and take off running. The person who received the handkerchief would then chase the first person. If the first person got back into the empty space, that ended it. The person with the handkerchief would then start repeating the process. Sounds dumb, but we had a lot of fun, especially in the younger years. At a certain magical point in springtime, the boys broke out the marbles they had stashed away all winter. Usually they were in a wooden cigar box. The favorite game was to draw a circle in the dirt, place the marbles in the center, then we would use a toy marble to bust up the center. Then we use a simple formula of knocking them out of the circle, each player taking his turn. The one with the most marbles was the winner. Years later, I found that the real name for toy was really tall. Sometimes we played for keeps, meaning that we kept all the marbles we knocked out of the circle. Mamas would always caution about this practice, saying it was sinful because it was like gambling. But when they weren't looking, we went ahead and did it. Hit the can requires equipment, but that was no trouble because a crimped tin can was always available and we seldom had a ball. So we just used a can like a baseball. We had bases, but they were in different places in different games, and the measurements all depended on whoever laid out the diamond. Sometimes there were heated arguments, but for the most part, everybody played fair. Sometimes we were lucky enough to have a real ball, but it usually was of sponge. We didn't have Little League or Pony League or any other kind of supervised games, so we just played ball. Sometimes, as we grew older, some of the better players would graduate to a mill-sponsored team, sort of a semi-pro team, and one mill would play against another. We seldom even thought about playing football because we didn't know much about it. If we did play, it was touch football, and the rules were different every time we played. We played a lot of card games, especially when the weather was bad. Mostly it was old maids or rook. Whoever ended up with the old maid card was deemed the loser. I can't remember the remainder of the cards, but I do remember one that had ruby red lips and the picture of a floozy. We also played lotto sometimes, and when Monopoly made its debut, some of the older kids played that. I'll always have a special place in my heart for burlap bags, because this is what we used to use to make our tents. Somebody's family always had a cow or two, and the cow feed came in these burlap sacks. First, we made a frame, usually of squares and rectangles out of tree limbs and stronger weeds. Then we stretched the burlap over it, leaving a door for entry. We seldom made Indian-type teepees, but opted for the angled ones because they were easier. We did make bows and arrows, Indian style, using narrow, weed-like reeds for arrows. Fortunately, nobody ever lost an eye. I guess our aim was not good enough. We played one game I have never heard of in any other area. It was called puffing tobacco tags. We sat on the steps and spread out the flattened tobacco tags, face up. Taking turns, we puffed a certain number of times, and the player who overturned the most tags was named the winner. There was always plenty of tags to play with because a lot of the grown-ups chewed tobacco, which is where the tags came from. I can remember only one brand of tobacco, Red Apple. We didn't have gangs, but we did have neighborhood groups that got together and shown some evidence of territorial rights. We considered ourselves fierce, but in fact, were sort of benign. Sometimes one neighborhood would declare war on another, and we'd use rocks, slingshots, and bows and arrows, but nobody ever got hurt. There was a lot of enthusiasm, but very little fighting. For slingshots, we used the fork of a tree branch, whittled down to usable size. Long strips of rubber from a tire inner tube propelled the rocks through the forks. Sometimes we got ambitious and made rubber guns. We'd saw a plank into the shape of a rifle, install a clothespin on the butt, and stretch a strip of rubber between the clothespin and the end of the rifle. To release the one-shot strip of rubber, we'd merely press the clothespin. Sometimes we got really ambitious and made a machine gun. We put notches along the top of the rifle barrel and stretched the circles of rubber on the rifle, one atop the other. To fire, we'd lift a string we had installed in the notches, and if we really wanted to blast somebody, we'd shoot all the notches at once. February was the time to think about making kites, presumably anticipating the winds of March. We scrounged whatever sticks we could get to make the body, which was shaped like a cross. A string ran from each point of the cross to another. Then we'd apply the frame to paper, paste it around the string, and install a tail of torn rings for balance. We knew nothing of aerodynamics, but believe it or not, the kites usually fell. An indoor game we played at an early age was pass the thimble. Sitting around in a circle, we'd put our hands together flat. As it went around with a thimble concealed between his palms, he would dip his flattened hands, holding the thimble, into each set of flattened hands, one after another. Some unknown person would have secretly received the thimble. From then on, I can't remember what happened. Somebody was supposed to guess who got the thimble or something, and somebody was either rewarded or something. It was an innocuous, dumb-sounding kind of game. But remember, we didn't even have a radio, much less TV. We had to manufacture our own games. Okay, that's it for John's remembrance of childhood clothes and games. Thank you for watching.